Hey, Bob here. Today I'll be taking a look at the Ajazz AC081 from EpoMaker. It is a fully built CNC aluminum 75% keyboard featuring hotswap sockets, per key RGB, gasket mounting, and an aesthetic I personally really like, especially the cat's pad colorway, which is the one I have on hand. I believe it is an E-white, which explains the $10 price increase from its gray anodized counterpart. Before we move on, a word from our sponsor, PCBWay. PCBWay is your one-stop shop for all DIY tech projects. On the circuit side, they offer advanced PCB prototyping, manufacturing, assembly, and populating. Regarding actual materials, they provide 3D printing, sheet metal fabrication, injection molding, and CNC machining. Each of these categories also have many sub-options related to their service. For example, for CNC machining, you can choose from a variety of materials, finishes, and level of precision. Their website and ordering process is relatively straightforward, and their prices are very competitive. If you're interested to learn more, the link to their website will be in the description. Right, back to the video. Before I begin the unboxing, I want to mention that this was sent over to me by EpoMaker for free. However, all my opinions are completely unbiased and honest. Right, so this board comes in two colorways named Peace and Cat's Pad. The Peace variant comes with KL box whites, and the Cat's Pad variant comes with KL box Hush Silence. It comes in a relatively sturdy box with the Apple style lift to open design. You're first greeted with a sheet of paper featuring a QR code that takes you to a page regarding Ajazz's Dice Fruit Switch series. It's kind of weird because this board doesn't come with the Dice Switch series, but it's there. Anyways, underneath is the keyboard itself, which we'll get back to in a moment. A thin sheet of foam hides the extra gaskets, the user's manual, and a box of accessories. Within the box contains a 2-in-1 switching keycap puller, braided USB-C cable, and some extra keycaps. Back to the board, let's take a closer look. This board uses an exploded 75% layout, which I much prefer over the compact one. With the F row and arrow keys isolated, in my opinion, it's much nicer to look at and use. On the right side of the board, you've probably noticed the pink engraved cat paw badge, which is also CNC aluminum, and a triangle design underneath, which actually lights up when plugged in. I think these two components add to the aesthetic and give the board a more premium look, no complaints here. I also really like the minimal design of the case. Elements like the rounded corners in contrast with the relatively sharp edges and hanging cliff design at the top once again add up to a premium look. One thing that does bother me though is that the USB-C port does not sit exactly in the center, rather slightly shifted to the right. Although not a big deal, it kinda throws off the whole look by a bit. The back of the board features a simple design as well, with the Ajazz logo engraved in the center. It also has 4 rubber feet pre-installed, and the board is held together by 8 gold-plated Phillips head screws. The included keycaps are double-shot PBT JSA profile. The legends are sharp, colors are vibrant, and overall feel high quality. No complaints here as well. As mentioned earlier, the switches in this variant are the KL box Hush Silence. The top housings are polycarbonate, and the stems and bottom housings are nylon. Although not specified, I assume these use 62-gram springs. As you can see, in order to achieve the reduced sound, the design is different from traditional switches. This also allows the switches to be water and dust resistant. Pretty cool. Something I noticed was that the PCB assembly was sitting loosely and could easily shift side to side and up and down. We'll fix this later on. Here's a quick sound test. This is my first time using silent switches, so the feel and sound were quite unfamiliar. I can say that they were definitely smooth and didn't have much spring ping. The stock stabilizers had minimal rattle but felt incredibly mushy. More on that later. Since I do prefer loud, pronounced switches with sharp bottom mounts, these were far from my liking. To demonstrate how quiet they are, here's a quick comparison with EpoMaker's HT Palms, which are the switches I'll be using from now on. The HD Palms are a light tactile switch featuring a full palm build and 63.5 gram double stage springs. The double stage springs allow for a snappy return and overall more responsive typing feel. Being said, here's a sock sound test with the new switches. With the sound test out of the way, let's open up the board. Removing the keycaps and switches, I flip the board around and unscrew the 8 Phillips screws. With those out, the 3 main components come free: the top case, PCB assembly, and bottom case. Let's take a look at the PCB assembly first. Removing 6 screws behind the PCB allows the aluminum plate to come free. Underneath sits a dense silicone plate dampener. With that removed, the PCB is finally free. Taking a closer look, you can see that the USB port is soldered and sits on the top side instead of the usual bottom side. Although most gasket mounted boards use daughter boards to preserve bounce, the port cutout on the AC081 is significantly large and enough clearance so that you don't have to worry about any compromise. A drawback is that there's no support for screw-in stabilizers, which is something many budget boards are starting to feature. Another downside is that this board uses north-facing sockets, meaning there is potential interference with cherry profile keycaps depending on the switches you use. I personally would have preferred if they removed the per key RGB in exchange for south-facing sockets, but if you don't plan on changing the included keycaps, the north-facing sockets aren't too big of a deal as JSA profile does not cause interference. Anyways, the hotswap sockets are from KL and support up to 5-pin switches. There is no QMK via support, however, Ajazz does provide their own software. Alright, back to the top case. The paint job is very consistent with no noticeable blemishes or defects. In addition, there seems to be no machining marks on the inner areas as well. The cap hot badge is held in by 2 Phillips screws. With those removed, it comes free. Since this badge is removable, I guess if you really wanted to, you could replace it with your own creations if you have the resources to design and mill. Onto the bottom case, apparently there is supposed to be a layer of foam included, however I didn't get any for some reason. Anyways, the bottom case is just a completely solid block of aluminum with no cuts or grooves. It's quite hefty and should minimize any hollowness. Alright, with all the parts out of the way, let's begin modding. I start by applying 3 layers of the tape mod and move on to replace the gaskets. Although the ones included may look thick and plush, they're way too dense and almost act like memory foam. As a result, they reduce bounce and lead to a stiffer feel. I replaced them with D65 gaskets as they're much more springy. I also didn't fill all the original spots as I felt that it would provide too much support. Here's the before and after difference. The next thing I wanted to do was a force break mod, which involves applying a layer of tape around the points where the top and bottom case screw together. This results in reduced case ping as the layer of tape diminishes the resonance traveling from the bottom case to the top. Moving on, I added 4 gasket strips to the top side of the plate. This is because the stock gaskets on the top case are too thin to do anything, which resulted in the loose PCB assembly shown earlier. This should allow for some compression and reduce movement. I also surround the LED logo shroud with gaskets as there's light bleeding around it. The gaskets should fill any gaps and contain the light. I then proceed to work on the stabilizers. While I work on the stabilizers, I wanted to give a quick thanks to BenQ for sending over the ScreenBar Plus for me to try out. So far, I'm really enjoying it and it's actually replaced my original desk light. With the bar being mounted on my monitor, it in turn saves quite a lot of space compared to before. One of my favorite features would be the auto dimming function, which uses a sensor to automatically adjust brightness and color temperature. It is also USB powered, meaning no finicky outlet plug. Installation is relatively simple and it's compatible with most monitors, even my curved one. Its position also means that there's no monitor glare. If you're interested and want more details, the Amazon link will be in the description. Clipping the stems, balancing the wires, relooping the housings. But while testing them, although there is no rattle, they were still very mushy. I tried figuring out why, but I couldn't come up with any reason. Unsatisfied, I ended up replacing them with modded Everglide pandas, which solved the issue. With the stabilizers resolved, I cut out a layer of PE foam to the PCB dimensions and poke holes so the switches have a better fit. With all the mods done, I begin reassembling the board. This time, I will not be screwing the plate to the PCB, rather, they will be held together via friction of the switches. Speaking of the switches, all of them now have their spring looped with 105 grade 0 and the back of the leaf coated with dielectric grease. This should hopefully eliminate any source of ping. For the alpha keys, I also looped the stems with 205 grade 0, but make sure to keep the legs dry in order to preserve the tactile feel. I then installed the USB-C port shield and stacked the components together. Reinserting the 8 screws and installing the keycaps, the build is now complete. Here's a modded sound test. Alright, so I loved how the board turned out. I also wanted to throw in some linears as I do prefer them over tactiles. So I grabbed a few looped Gateron Milky Yellows and switched out the alpha keys. Here's the linear sound test. Right, so that basically concludes the build. Overall, I'm really happy with how it turned out. I say the sound and feel didn't really blow me away in any sense, but I'm not disappointed either. Although not the bounciest board I've encountered, there's a decent amount of play after replacing the gaskets. The tapping experience is relatively soft and consistent, which I like. In the future, I'd probably consider cutting off the plate standoffs, getting some long pull linears, and replacing the keycaps with a set of cherry profiles. But for now, I'm satisfied. The only major complaint I have is north-facing sockets, lack of screw and stabilizer support, and no QMK via compatibility. Now, considering that the board alone would cost around 95 USD if we factor in the retail prices for the switches and keycaps, I guess it does make sense that they had to cut some corners. But let's be honest, only a very small percentage of people will be sticking with the silent or clicky switches. With that in mind, if you're looking for more freedom and bang for the buck, I suggest you check out the Keyground Q1 instead. However, if you just prefer the aesthetics of the AC081, don't mind the north-facing sockets or pre-installed switches, it's not a bad option either. Just make sure you have your needs and want in mind before making the purchase. Right, so that brings us to the end of the video. If you enjoyed it, consider leaving a like or subscribing, it really helps the channel out.